Hi there you guys, welcome back to my channel. Now today I'm going to be discussing the various decks that you can build for Final Fantasy TCG now that Opus VII is out in the wild, as well as talking about some of the decks that already exist that are getting boosts from Opus VII. But before I do that, I wanted to turn you guys' attention to my Patreon page, which I've had for a couple of months now, but I try not to push too heavily down people's throats. I normally reserve this kind of thing for the end of my videos, but I wanted to give a big shout out to everybody that's been so supportive with my Patreon page over the past couple of months, and I'd really love it if you guys could check it out. So there's a link in the description box below. I especially want to give a quick shout out to Featherclaws, who did a very good job with a very interesting deck at the recent Ontario Cup, and I'm going to quickly leave a link to that in the description box below because I think it's a very interesting deck and I think you guys might want to explore it a bit better. So before going into the new decks entirely, like brand new, all these things that have come out of Opus VII, I want to talk about some of the existing decks that I think are going to see a lot of play come with some of the cards that have come out of Opus VII. And the first one I want to talk about, and I'm really happy to say it, is Mono Fire. Now Mono Fire has gotten a lot out of Opus VII, and I'm not just talking about Jekt or Larn, both of which are extremely good cards. Jekt in particular, I've tested a fair amount myself in a different deck which I'll get to later, but honestly, Yuri does a lot for this deck. Yuri allows you to kind of open things up by dulling and freezing, drawing a card, and removing abilities from things like Ishtola in such a way that you end up being able to open your opponent up to fire in a way you couldn't before. Now Turbo Discard is going to get a little bit of a buff this set, nothing too heavy, but I think Gremlin is going to be quite prevalent in that deck, and I also think that Lastwell is going to do a lot of work. The only thing that concerns me with Lastwell is that, obviously being an ice card, it's actually a really strong counter to Turbo Discard because it can take out things like Thaumaturges really quickly, but obviously if a deck becomes its own best counter, that can become a problem, but we'll wait and see how many Lastwell start to see play, but I would expect to see at least one or two in Turbo Discard decks. Mono Lightning, I think, is going to get a heck of a lot this set, and it's on the back of only a few cards. Now, I like X-Death quite a lot as a one-of in Mono Lightning decks, or in a lot of decks actually, but I think Mono Lightning ramping its backup so quickly, I think X-Death might see some play, but only as a one-of. Seymour is a card that I think is going to see a lot of play generally, and I think it boosts Lightning quite nicely by stacking things like Odins to the top of your deck. And I think that Arisha Al Rasha could be really good with this particular Seymour, because if you're putting a 7 CP Odin on top of your deck and you draw it, you can at least exchange it for something else later, and I quite like that idea. And then Zapped, I think, is the card for Mono Lightning right now. It's resurrectable by Urianger, so it might even see play in Scions. I think the fact that you can get it back so quickly with Zemus is really strong, and Zemus is already a strong card. And Ramu, there are actually multiple different versions of Ramu that are actually really powerful right now, particularly the 3 CP Ramu from the previous set. So I do think that Zapped is going to do a lot for that deck. The other WoF monsters will also do quite well in other decks, but Zapped in particular I really, really like. Mono Water is going to get a nice little buff from Legendary Tidus. I think that, having spoken about him in my last video, just leaving the 3 water backups open is just going to make your opponent wonder if you have him or not, and I think that that's a really powerful play. And I also quite like him with Phoenix as well, but I'm not sure that you want to run him necessarily in Fire Water, unless you're running more water than fire, but it stands to reason that that could see play. Ice Midrange is going to get very much a similar sort of buff to Turbo Discard. I don't think it'll be Gremlin that gets a lot of play in there, but Lastwell certainly will, because over the course of time he just gets stronger. And then Snow is a card that a lot of people are probably going to play, so do bear that in mind. If you're thinking about wanting to counter that card, you might want to start running Aerith or things that are harder to target, things like Ranger. I think that, that being said, there are plenty of decks that are already in existence that are going to get a lot of power out of Opus VII, some more than others. Wind Earth got maybe a couple of toys, but nothing too powerful compared to what it already had, but that deck is still going to see play. It's still very, very good. And then Water Wind, maybe you'll see the Crystal Chronicles engine in there, but I'm not sure that it's more powerful than what you've got. You've also got a bit of an FF5 engine now that I really like the look of, but I'm not sure if it's going to really kind of elevate it any more than it already is. It's already a really, really powerful deck, but there are plenty more decks that are going to get buffs. Sound off in the comments below if you think I've missed any, and let me know what you guys are planning on playing. But then we're going to go and talk about some of the decks that are brand new that are going to come out of this set. Now the first deck that I want to talk about when it comes to new deck ideas is actually one that I've been playtesting since I got my pulls from Opus VII, and it's going to be Fire/whatever Warrior of Light. I've been personally testing it with water, and I'll get to why in a second, but honestly, the combination of Aegis, Sol, and the dual deck Warrior of Light is extremely good. You throw Light Wall into that mix, and you've got a really, really powerful value engine. If you want to run Light Warrior of Light instead, then you can do that, or you could run both and run Cosmos and Materia, things like that. But I liked having Light Wall as my predominant source of value, and I really enjoyed it. You could run this with Fire Wind by way of things like Bart's and Arc, or you could go the Earth route and you could run Kryl, the new Kryl, and Ingus, but I actually really like it with Fire and Water because I really like the synergies between Dusk and Wall. I really think that that's a really solid value engine. I really like Famfrit with Wall and Dusk, like using Dusk to pay for itself, to pay for Famfrit and then sacrifice itself on block is like a really powerful value machine, and I really like that. And then obviously if you resurrect it with either Phoenix or Wall, then you're going to get more cards out of it. It just seems really strong. And then I really like just kind of what Water, Fire. I really wanted to put Featherclaws in this deck, but I think it's a different deck which I'm going to get to in a little while. But honestly, the Warrior of Light engine is very good, and I'm really enjoying it, and I hope you guys look into it as well. Now, it would be remiss of me to not mention the Crystal Chronicles cards within this kind of video. I think that the Crystal Chronicles cards can go in mono wind predominantly, but I do think that there's room for it to go into water wind or maybe wind fire, because wind fire will give you access to Latov, who can resurrect either Yuri or Chelinka. Water wind will give you access to other value plays like the FF10 engine or even the FF5 engine, things like, you know, Faris and Lena, and you could just start accumulating a board. But I really like just the combination of Yuri, Chelinka, their Searcher and their backup. I think they just do very nice things together, and the combo potential is huge. And I think that adding things like Zoo is really strong. You've got Liak as well, so it's going to be really difficult. But the thing that I will bear in mind with this deck, it could even be a Wind Earth shell, because you want to be able to keep Yuri and Chelinka alive. And so things like Miner might be really useful for this particular deck, or Tama, because you can obviously do that in combination plays with things like Cecil. I do think that the Crystal Chronicles engine is going to see some play though. It's already seeing a little bit now, and I think that it's only going to get stronger as time goes on. Now, I've been looking for a home for the new Sephiroth for a little while now, and I don't think he goes in Turbo Discard because he's too expensive. I don't think he goes in Mono Ice mid-range because Orphan exists, and I think Orphan kind of outsells him in that particular deck, but obviously Orphan requires you to have 5 or more Ice characters. So I personally think that the best home for Sephiroth is actually going to be in an Earth Ice kind of mid-range control deck, where you have access to so many great engines, it's ridiculous. Now, I touched on this in my vlog for Euros when I talked about Tush's Tricolour deck, and I think that having access to multiple engines is actually really powerful, but instead of having 6 or 11, just those 2, you also get access to 7, because Jesse can search for either Genesis or Sephiroth, and it's, you know, that could be a really powerful play in combination with the fact you already get the FF6 engine plus Dadaluma. You have a search of a Dadaluma in that deck, and then you can also run like a one-off Terra, because this was a deck that saw play in Opus 4 where you would use Terra to ping Dadaluma so you get combos that way. But I think that using Sephiroth as an end game play in combination of things like Miner could be like the way to seal the deal for that deck, and I think it could be really strong. Now, a lot of people really like this card. I personally don't. I think that a lot of people are overhyping this card, but I think that it would be a shame for me to not at least mention Gilgamesh, because I know a lot of people want to run this card. I think the best home for Gilgamesh is going to be in an Earth Lightning deck, alongside cards like Vanille, who are very good at kind of staying on the board, and this new Gilgamesh is very good at doing that. I really don't want to see people running 15 Gilgameshes though, because it's going to be cloggy, it's going to be really hard to play around with. With the deck I talk about in a little while as well, I found that running 5 copies of a single character was difficult, so running any more than that is going to be really tough. But I think that if you're running alternate ways to make Gilgamesh that much stronger so that he hits his kind of sweet spot of 10k, you might be wanting to look at Kefka from Opus 1 for Earth, or maybe Gipple. You know, Gipple would be a really solid play. If you've got even 2 Gilgameshes in your break zone, or something that can make him stronger, then a Gipple will instantly allow him to attack twice, and that's really strong. And then Lightning, obviously, you being able to go on haste, means that you could run Gilgamesh in. If something kills him, then you can always bring back another Gilgamesh by killing him through either Hecaton or, you know, your Jimbo. There's loads of little ways of doing that, and then bringing out another Gilgamesh, giving him haste, and then attacking twice as well. If you want like massive combo potential, I think like an Earth Lightning Gilgamesh deck might be a good deck for you. Now, having tested the Water Fire Warrior of Light deck, I actually think that there are certain plays that I've been making in that deck that would fit a different deck entirely for Fire Water. And Featherclaws has been seeing a lot of play recently, and I think that Opus 7 has opened fire up to the capabilities of playing him as well. And the reason for that is Jekt. Now, Jekt is actually very, very good, and I've been playing him and enjoying him as a 2-of in my Fire Water Warrior of Light deck. However, one of the plays that I really, really enjoyed playing was playing him with Scholar, where you can go, if I'm behind by 2 points or 3 points of damage, which can happen, certainly if you're playing a Featherclaws deck, you can pay 1 for Ject, deal a point of damage, pick the Ject back up again with a Scholar, and then play him again and hit them again. And then in Fire Water can accumulate value quite nicely as well, so a lot of Water certainly can through things like Viking and Layla. And then Fire can do the removal part of it as well. And then having access to Halicarnassus as well means that you kind of remove a lot of the problem cards that Fire tends to have to deal with, like Ishtola and Dazzaluma. So being able to access those things, I think Fire Water can actually make a really strong control deck now. So I think that it's definitely one worth experimenting with, and it's definitely one that I plan to experiment with as well. And then running along with that theme as well, it's something that, I mean, you could say that this was an existing deck already, depending on whether or not you followed some of my decks previously. But I think that an Earth-Water damage control deck is actually going to be really, really popular, because you have access to Featherclaws already, but you also have access to Noctis now, as well as Dark Knight Cecil from Opus 1, who can kind of, you know, make it so that whenever you take damage, your opponent is going to pay dearly for doing it. And obviously with Featherclaws, you're allowed to do it to yourself. Sin, you're allowed to do it to yourself. But, you know, there's lots of little ways that you can get around things like that. And I really like the fact that you can run sort of Deleter and Noctis, and then run cards like Peuge, who can activate it on tap, because it can activate any prince or knight. And Earth and Water actually has quite a lot of those. So I actually think that Earth-Water kind of damage control could be a really, really cool and strong deck. And then this is another deck that you could probably consider as an existing deck, but I think that Prish can give new life to, or the new Prish certainly can give new life to Mono Earth decks that use her as a focus. Mono Earth is very, very good at using FF11 as a search engine. You could even argue this is an Earth Wind Prish deck instead, because of the amount of stuff you get from FF11, but I think that you have to be very, very careful on the number of Prishes that you run. As I spoke about earlier with Gilgamesh, I ran 5 Prish once upon a time, and I like 3 of the 6 drop Prish from Opus 4 and 2 of the 2 drop Prish from Opus 3, and I really liked it. But you have to find ways of being able to make sure you can use the extra cards in your hand. Although I really, really enjoy using Mog from Mobius and Miner as ways of being able to use Prish, even if you don't actually have one in hand. So you could, in response to a Prish dying, you could always search for the new Prish from your deck, and then using Mog, and then you have a Prish in your hand on resolution, so you can play her and then kill something instantly. Or if that one of Prish is already gone, you can always grab it back with Miner instead. And I think it's a really, really cool kind of different take on Mono Earth or Earth Wind that could be really, really strong. Though I do think, as I say, I think it could end up being a little inconsistent, but I encourage you guys to try it. And then the last couple of decks I did want to talk about, because I think that a lot of people will comment if I don't, are going to be Fire Water Guardians and Fire and Ice Final Fantasy 13. I'll be honest with you guys, I don't particularly like the Fire Water Guardian deck. I think it's far too slow. I think that it's similar to like the Gull Wings from Opus 6, who also ended up being too slow and ended up getting played, or stopping being played in favour of the Opus 1 Gull Wings instead. But I think that Auron is, you know, Cyan, very, very similar to him, and he doesn't see an awful lot of play. Kimari is just too expensive for what he does, and it's very easy to remove him and open the rest of your board up. Tidus is very good, but I think that he's better suited to a deck that's mono-coloured, and this is asking for water fire. I mean, you could run a Phoenix to do it, but then Tidus is probably your only target for Phoenix if you're running all the Guardians, because they're all 4 CP or higher. So I'm not a big fan of the Water Fire Guardians deck. Title format, totally different kettle of fish. And the same applies to the Fire and Ice FF13 deck. I think that Fang, a lot of people are really excited by Fang because of the amount of value she brings. But she brings that value at the cost of having to skew your deck in favour of making her that way. And I think the Fire and Ice already actually has quite a lot of nice tools like Shulk. And Ledna, things like that, so I think you just got to be careful with what you can and can't do with a tribal style deck. I think that there are tribal decks that work really, really well. I mentioned Warrior of Light earlier, I mentioned Crystal Chronicles. Opus 1 Gull Wings are kind of tribal, and they've been good since the beginning of the game. Scions are a really strong tribal deck, but I just don't see these 2 decks quite at the same level as those. Although I would love to be proven wrong. If you guys go to a tournament with a Fire and Ice FF13 deck or a Fire and Water FF10 Guardian deck, then I'd love to see it, and I'd love to hear about your experiences with it. Now obviously there are going to be tons of other decks that see play over the ones that I've just mentioned, but obviously I just want to give all of you guys a springboard for all the different kind of ideas that you could have so that you can refine and like learn about a deck archetype that you really enjoy and then just make it your own. All of these are meant to be like ideas. I'm not saying these are the only deck archetypes that you could run. I'm not saying that these are limited, or like there aren't 20 other decks that could be really, really good. And nor do I agree that even, you know, the card decks I've said that I didn't particularly like were going to be bad. So honestly, sound off in the comments if you can think of any other decks that you can think of that you really want to run, or if you disagree with some of the things that I said. I encourage you guys to go out there and play your own deck and things like that. I just wanted to give you guys some ideas. But that's going to be it for this video. Thank you ever so much for watching. The other thing that I would like you to do in the comments is to sound off if you want me to make a full deck profile for any of the decks that I've listed here. I've already built up Fire, Water, Warrior of Light, and I'm probably going to be sharing that with you in the near future. And then we've got Worlds coming up in a couple of weeks as well, so obviously sound off if you think that there's going to be a particular deck at Worlds that you want to see, or if you want to see me comment on anything that you think you're going to see at Worlds. And that's going to be it from me. So thanks very much for watching. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and check out all of my social links, and I'll speak to you guys very soon. See you later.